Morning, folks. We are ready to start. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Muthu Kumar. I go by Kumar, and I work for Juniper Networks. Pallavi?
Hi, my name is Pallavi Mahajan, and I'm part of the Juniper engineering team. I've been with Juniper for 12 years, and it's going really strong so far.
So both me and Pallavi decided that Pallavi will speak more and I'll speak less. So in the introduction, we needed to emphasize the part of what Pallavi does in Juniper, and we will continue to do that in the course of the presentation. So with that, it's kind of a little warm here, and I'm wearing this jacket, and it's not very comfortable. So pardon me if I blurt out something. The topic that we have today is from Arab Springs to Google search. How networking is changing the landscape in the world today. That's the topic that we have. When we put together this presentation, there were lots of facts that was coming out, and I wasn't aware of those facts. And it truly appears that we are living in a connected world. It truly appears. And there are numerous examples that prove that point. And here we are bringing out some of those powerful examples to you. And that's the next 45 minutes to an hour. With that introduction, we're going to look at multiple images, and I'm probably blocking those images. Yeah? This is the screen that you'll be looking at. We are looking at multiple images, right? And we're going to go zoom in on some of these images and talk for the next 45 minutes. Right? That's the presentation, right? We thought we'll just leave that slide and talk with just one slide. Then we realized it's going to be hard for you to see those images, and now we're going to zoom in on those images, starting with this. We decided that you're going to speak more.
So the other thing that we also decided was that I'll take all the fun elements, and Kumar is going to talk about all the serious elements. Kumar talks about the connected world. Now, what is the connected world? And let's look at the different elements that you guys would think are very basic. Isn't this what life is all about? And somewhere down beneath it, networking is the thing that is enabling all of these things that we are getting so used to in our life. Now, let's look at social media. We are also hooked up into Facebook. Actually, just before this, we guys took a selfie, and we were just about to post it on Facebook, and we want to see how many likes we are getting. And I'm sure Kumar at this point is trying to think about how many likes has he really gotten right now. But on a serious matter, right, it's not just about the social media helping us connect with each other. It is also helping us transform the world in a way that we had never talked about. In fact, the other day Kumar was telling me how there was a situation where a woman who was traveling all by herself in the Indian railways felt that some of her co-passengers were misbehaving and she wasn't feeling safe. She sent a tweet to the Indian Railways tweet handle, and in the next railway station there were railway protection police force that came in, and they took those not so very well behaved people out of the train. I mean, I would not have imagined this. And how is this exactly happening, right? This is where networking comes back in the background that helps enable things in a way that we had never imagined as we were building these technologies. Now, for me, and I hope my clicker works, for me, this one is a very important one. Because now with e-commerce, I have gotten back the 2 or 3 hours of my life that otherwise I would go spend, do groceries. In fact, so I am a mom of 2 very adorable girls. And I feel that it's actually ending up being a very good parenting tool for me. It's not just, I can buy stuff. It's actually also a very good parenting tool for me. My dad used to give us brownie points if we behaved well and we did the gardening and cleaning of the car for him. In return, we would get some bonus points that would mean that we could watch TV for that many hours. Now, I, as a modern age mom, I have transformed it. I still make my kids do gardening. I still make them go clean my cars, but I give them Flipkart bonus points. And with those Flipkart bonus points, what they end up doing is they buy all those silly rainbow looms and all the stuff that girls are very crazy about. So again, going back to the element behind how this is happening, the world has changed. There are newer technologies that are coming in. We are in a world where using our smartphone, we can do things that have changed the way our lives were supposed to be running, maybe some 10 years back. And now, again, this is the popular element. So entertainment, I have to talk about entertainment. So who do you think is the most popular person on YouTube? Lady Gaga? It used to be Lady Gaga. So yeah, actually, you just talked about Prime Minister Modi. In fact, that's a very interesting aspect. I think the last US presidential elections and in fact this Indian election were primarily run by social media. This is the impact that social media and the technologies behind it can create. In fact, these days, all the smart TVs that we buy, they're YouTube enabled. My kids know exactly how to go to YouTube and search everything that comes as their homework assignment. Though as a mom, I'm actually still very paranoid about it. And that's where the secure and the security element comes in. And we're going to delve into that a little later. But the whole point is that in this connected world, there are a lot of different ways for us to get information. And information, whether it is right from connecting with our friends, information, whether it is right from going about and shopping or doing any of our groceries, information, whether it is going about and getting the latest about what Lady Gaga is doing or what Janet Jackson is doing, that kind of stuff. And then, we have transformed the way we go about and do travel. Today, I can walk into any new country. I walk into the airport, I go to a kiosk. It's not manned by anyone. I go to a kiosk, I give my passport details, and I get like a car rented in a matter of 5 minutes. In fact, in a very recent trip that I had, this was in the UK, at the London Heathrow Airport, I went in through a gate where I just swiped my boarding pass and my passport, and in not more than a minute, I was out of the immigration counter. It has never ever happened to me in my life. And how is this happening? This is all because there is a system at the airport which is connected to some servers, which has the database about how many times has she been caught for driving offenses. I don't think they count driving offenses because that way I wouldn't have gotten a 1 minute entry. But you know what I'm talking about. I can go into a new country, I can quickly use Google Translate, and I can talk to them in the language that they talk. I have navigation tools, I can smartly, confidently drive, though it's another way that even with navigation tools I still get lost. But many directionally abled people can quickly navigate their way and go to newer destinations. I could not have imagined this world as I was growing up. And this is where we are saying that the world is getting more and more connected, and networking is playing a big part in making that happen. And then smart cars. How many of you have actually read about Tesla? The whole autopilot stuff. Isn't it cool? I still cannot get to do parallel parking. I don't need to now learn to do parallel parking. Now the cars are getting smarter, right? The cars are getting smarter to do parallel parking. In fact, the car can navigate, it can tell me, I'm getting into a certain zone, this is the restaurant that I could go to, all of that stuff. This amount of intelligence, the car is now a connected car. Of course, some of you might be thinking that, we've heard about connected cars, and we've also heard about this thing that some people carjacked a car and, they changed the brakes and all of that. Of course, we know that there are bad elements also. And that's where, again, intelligent networking comes into picture, because it's not just about making networks, it is also about making networks secure. We have kids on YouTube. We want to make sure that everything that they're looking at is secure and certified by me as a mom that this qualifies to be okay content for my 8-year-old. So that's what intelligent networks are all about. And now we get on to serious elements, and with that, I pass it to Kumar.
Thanks, Pallavi. I think I'm going to talk about the field of health and education, right? A lot of us as parents, we want our children to go to the best of the universities in the world, and that's kind of one of our key dreams that we struggle and toil in our life for. So now it's like serious talk, right? It is serious talk. MIT, right? OpenCourseware. Some of you would have heard about it, right? MIT is one of the most renowned institutes in the world, leading educational institute in the world. And they had this project called OpenCourseware, where they wanted to actually have an online access to some of their more serious courses and more popular courses for their student community that is unable to reach that institute and physically sit in the classrooms and go about learning, right? And today, thousands and thousands of their course material is being made available online for the community at large, for the world at large, to kind of access that. And this was a trendsetter in the world. Now today, every leading educational institution is trying to put their courses online, and people can access those courses, whether it is classroom lectures, whether it is home assignments, or the answers and solutions to the home assignments. Everything is online, right? And it is available real time in an experience which is meaningful. That's very important, in an experience that it is meaningful and real time, right? The other is the concept of e-health, right? In places across the globe where people do not have access to proper consultation with the medical community, now you have this concept of a telemedicine coming out, e-health coming out. Think about it, right? What kinds of possibilities can you accomplish in such a connected world when you have these consultants, the experts sitting in one corner of the world and still trying to address the pain points of the larger public community in some remote rural areas of the planet. It's really cool stuff, right? And it's really meaningful stuff. Next slide. I'm going to talk about what happened in the early parts of 2010. This is something that happened in the December of 2010, right? There is this young man, right? He loses his father when he's just 3 years old, right? He's got many siblings. In fact, he's one of the younger siblings. Mother is widowed, right? So he has a very difficult childhood. And by the age of 10, 11, he had to actually provide for the family. He had to provide for the family. And he lives in this country, which probably many of us do not think about very frequently. It's a country called Tunisia, right? And as he continues to provide the daily living for his family, he starts getting into selling fruits, selling vegetables, getting these carts out on the streets. And in that country, you need to have the permission of the officials to sell anything in the public places. And obviously, he doesn't have those permissions. And there is a level of corruption that exists in the society that you will have to go and align yourself with the officials in order for you to sell the produce. Think about it. Here is a young man, and he has no background, no education, and all he has to do is go borrow money from somebody, go very early in the morning to the marketplace, buy the produce, and then take it to the streets and sell the produce to make a living. Life is hard. Life is really hard. And one of those days, he tries doing what he did the past several months and years. And these officials come. He has not paid them off. They humiliate him publicly. After a lot of harassment, they humiliate him publicly. And the fuse breaks. So the man goes to the governor's residence and wants an hearing, wants an audience with the governor. The governor refuses. He doesn't know what to do. He goes to the nearby gas station, gets a can of gasoline, comes to the middle of the road and shouts, what do you expect me to do? What do you expect me to do? Self-immolates himself, dies 18 days later, and that triggers a revolution in the country. Protest after protest after protest. The country comes down to a standstill, and that's the beginning of what we call as a revolution that is spreading across North African states and in the Middle East. We call it the Arab world, and this is commonly termed as the Arab Springs. It results in a change of government in so many countries. During that process, from 2010 to 2012, governments fall in Tunisia, governments fall in Egypt, governments fall in Libya, and the protest starts spreading to other pockets of the larger Arab world, where dictatorship is normal. A highly controlled government is normal. After listening to this powerful story of a common man struggling to make a living and failing to do that, and creating the spark and the revolution that brings down the form of government, you see this on the net where people are saying, thank you, Facebook. They are saying, thank you, Facebook. And why is it? They used Facebook to connect, to plan, to strategize their protest against the ruling government. And the ruling government was unable to stop that. And so, when they finally succeeded in making the government fall and a change of regime happens, there is a lot of celebration on the streets, and people are writing graffiti on the walls saying, thank you, Facebook. They have the placards that say, thank you, Facebook. And it is truly a connected world which is making a meaningful difference. Think about it. Next slide. We come back to this image, right? We talked about so many different things that are happening around us, whether it is the way we buy things, whether it is the way we travel, whether it is the education that we impart to our children, whether it is the future of the health, whether it is a connected smart home or a connected car. The network is playing a very, very, very crucial role. All of these applications that you talk about are just not possible if the connections are not scaling, if the connections are not strong enough, if the connections are not secure. The so-called pipes make all the difference. Now, how many times do we think about the pipes that make all these things a reality in today's connected world? That's the thought that we want to leave you with. Next slide. I want you to focus on these interesting data points. The number of internet users, the number of emails in a day, right? I can't read this. It's like 100 billion emails in a day. And that's what we put on the network. 100 billion emails to be carried on in a single day, right? We haven't given the WhatsApp statistics, but today my wife expects me to respond to her in WhatsApp in real time. Right? Not only that, she's so angry with me and the technology that when she goes to a shop and swipes her credit card, there is an SMS that reaches me. And she is asking me, please disable that. And I need to figure a way to disable that, and I will, right? But when you swipe your credit card, the transaction travels half the way across the globe to a server where it gets authenticated, and there is a bank transaction that happens, your credit limits are checked, and the approval comes back in a matter of microseconds that you don't even realize what is happening in the background. That's the power of the connected world. That is truly the power of the connected world, right? Of course, Facebook likes. Everybody likes to post their images and get the likes, right? When I post my image, I hardly get like 3-4 likes, right? And I've stopped using Facebook, right? I'm one of these ancient guys that
I think everyone in the room is now going to go and give you a like.
Then I need to figure out how to log into Facebook, because I've kind of forgotten the logins to Facebook. But this is amazing and interesting data points that when you look at it, you figure out that all these are possible because of the strong, secure, scalable, reliable pipes that we have created in this planet today. If not, this is just not possible. And there are certain organizations in the world that are front-ending this technology of connectivity. And without that connectivity, you cannot do your Amazons, you cannot do your Googles, you cannot do your Facebooks, you cannot do your WhatsApp, you cannot do your credit card transactions, nothing. Next slide. So we started off putting the emails on the net, then the World Wide Web on the net, then the telephony on the net, then the video on the net, then the e-commerce on the net, and we are putting more and more and more and more things on the net. Right? So scale, capacity, reliability are extremely crucial for this network that you built. I'm going to introduce a term called routers and switches. These are the fundamental, intelligent, multi-processing, superly capable computers that make this network function. Often when somebody says computers, you visualize a nice laptop, preferably a Mac, right? A MacBook Air is what you visualize, right? And these days, people, when somebody talks about computers, they kind of visualize a smartphone, right? In fact, some of these smartphones are a lot more expensive than your laptops. To my surprise, I found that some of the smartphones out in the market cost upwards of $900 US. And I can buy a fantastic laptop for $400 to $500 US today, right? The most smart and intelligent computers that we build today, actually we call them as routers and switches, and they make the smart, intelligent networks happen. And hence we enjoy the benefits of going to an Amazon or going to a Flipkart or getting Flipkart points for our children or traveling across the globe safely and securely, right? Next slide. I think a lot of serious stuff.
So now that Kumar has introduced this term of these smart computers called routers and switches, what I wanted to do was to give you something beneath the hood and give you a perspective of what do networks do and what happens, right? So let's look at a Google search. I think every one of us here is so tuned to finding everything on Google. And how many of you here are cricket fans? How many of you like Brett Lee? Really? Okay, so here's what happens when I go to my PC. I am here, I have a MacBook Air, so I'm here in India, and I want to go find out something about Brett Lee. Now, the information about Brett Lee is actually housed in a data center, which is somewhere in Australia. And what I do is, I type Brett Lee. Actually, I type, is Brett Lee married? Yeah, and then in a matter of microseconds, I get a response, yes, he is. But let's look at, what happens when I've typed and, I've hit enter from my shiny MacBook Air. There are different elements that come into picture here. First of all, whatever I'm typing on my laptop, and it is going over to the internet, it needs to be secure. I don't want anyone to be able to eavesdrop on my connection and figure out that I'm having a crush on Brett Lee. So it's my privacy. So that's the reason that any content that is going out, we have these secure elements called firewalls. They end up making sure that the data that you're sending is in a secure pipe. From the firewall, the data goes to an ISP router. In my case, it happens to be Airtel. So it goes to Airtel. There is a router sitting over there which will figure out the packet that has been sent. It will figure out, which is the IP address or the destination to which this packet needs to be routed. Then, it has the intelligence, which I won't bore you into. Though after the session, I would love if anyone wants to have a conversation on that. So the packet goes to the firewall. From the firewall, it has now come to the router, which is my ISP's router, because all the traffic from my laptop is regardlessly going to go to my ISP. At the ISP's router, The router is going to decode, you know, what is the final destination and what is the route that I have to take. Now, there are a lot of algorithms that would be used in order to identify the hops that will be taken for this packet to go. You know, if this is, say, very critical data, for example, your voice call, right? Then the intelligence has to be that send it through a route which is the shortest route. If this is something which is not very time critical, for example, emails, then it might not send it through the shortest route. It might find a pipe which has the required bandwidth for the data to be sent, right? So there are different kind of algorithms that come into picture here. Now, in this case, because, you know, the ISP does some intelligence and figures out that it has to send it through 2 hops. So it goes to hop number 1, from hop number 1, it goes to hop number 2. And this hop number 2 is the ISP, or think of it as the edge router for the data center in Australia. From here, it goes to the firewall, because again, the content that is going into the data center, the content that is going out of the data center needs to be secure. So from there, it goes to the firewall, and my animations have kind of blown off. And there it goes to the data center. Now, in the data center, what are data centers typically composed of? You know, you have servers, you have storage devices, you have compute devices. Now, it needs to figure out which particular element should I be sending this information to, and that's what the switch does. It goes over to a server. It knows that, you know, this is actually intended to the server. It goes to the server. The server goes, figures out, gets the data from the storage device, and off the packet is now back all the way, traversing to India, this time picking up a different path, and I get my response, yes, Brett Lee is married. And the search ends. And the search ends. And all, my heart is broken in a matter of 100 milliseconds. So, you know, this is just to, you know, this is our attempt of providing you a quick overview of, you know, what happens, right? Now, when you do a Facebook like or you do a WhatsApp message, the same data is traversing all the way from one continent to the other. Kumar mentioned how swiping a card, you know, the whole authentication goes in from one continent to the other continent. All of this is enabled using this networking technology, which has enabled us to now build a connected world. Kumar.
So we go a little bit more into, characterizing the network. Essentially, all the network traffic is IP over Ethernet, right? And all traffic begins and ends with a computer, right? When you talk about devices today, when you talk about smartphones today, when you talk about laptops today, when you talk about data center servers today, they're all computers, right? So every traffic begins and ends in a computer. Just the form factor of the computer is different, and the visualization of a computer is different today. All networks need routers and switches, and all networks need security, right? Now, this connected world, as I said, is empowering people in a very, very meaningful way. Empowering people and connecting everything has been the vision, and we work for that company, Juniper Networks, which has carried this vision since 1996, and that's when internet started exploding and making a difference to our lives. With that, we end the presentation and ready to take questions.
If I go to the Google or if I go to the YouTube, inside it will show all the other links which may not be relevant to my page.
I think the question is about how do we protect our children from getting access to inappropriate content in the web. Yes, yes, that is the question. And there are parental filters and there are devices, and these parental filters can be set at your endpoint, can also be provisioned in the internet service provider that gives you the service by devices that are meant to filter the content for the use of your children and home, right? And they are available. So it's a matter of whether you want it within your endpoint or you want it provisioned in your internet service provider. You can choose which option do you want to take, but it is available today in today's world, and that's a very critical component of a very safe and secure way of using the internet.
Yeah. And we did talk about firewalls. Sorry. We did talk about firewalls. So essentially, we know, what kind of you can configure what kind of traffic do you want, and what kind of traffic do you not want. So that's the element that brings in the security aspect into networks also.
Secure networks.
So the question is about when we proclaim that the networks are secure, how are the hackers coming in? Yeah. So there is always a race of sorts between the good world and the bad world, right? Whatever defenses that you try to put into place, people will breach those defenses, and you need to be aware of how they breached it, and you need to protect it further. So there is always a constant tug of war going between the hacking community, and there are also ethical hackers that when you put out a secure, strong network, or when you put out a strong, secure intranet, as we call it, and protect your data centers and content, there are ethical hackers that are given the challenge of hacking it. So they try all methods and mechanisms that is known to the current world to breach and get inside. And if they're able to find a vulnerability, and often these vulnerabilities are the result of misconfigurations, are the result of misunderstanding how certain elements work in the network. It is also the results of certain malicious software coding practices that we use today in today's world, and all of these results in certain vulnerabilities, and the ethical hackers are empowered to go identify these vulnerabilities, and once they are identified, you go fix it.
When we are fixing it, right, I had a question again. We will be having multiple protocol versions which will be coming into the picture. When the hackers were coming like this, why won't we block those protocols which were vulnerable? Why are we allowing still those protocols which were vulnerable again?
So typically when a hacking is found and it is reported, okay, the intensity of the breach and the level at which the breach happens determines what you can do and what you cannot do. On many occasions, a breach can be prevented by certain defensive configurations without having to change the product that you have put it out. On many occasions, you will have to actually upgrade the product in order to prevent it. But remember, the functionality of the product can be affected if you disable certain basic foundational protocols and basic foundational features. It will not function. So if the breach happens at the lowest of the levels, you will have to necessarily stop and upgrade your device and fix the protocols where the breach happened, and thereby provide the protection. So it depends on where the breach happens. But there are always security advisories that go out that clearly enumerate what kinds of breaches have happened in the past and what is the protection mechanism available. It could be a browser upgrade to a different version, it could be a OS upgrade to a different version, it could be a firewall upgrade to the next version. So it's a combination of all of these things that enable you to secure your network or to secure your data content. So there are highly paid people that take this responsibility on their shoulders to protect your network. And they take that responsibility. And as common people that start using the network and using the content in the network, I don't think we have to take that responsibility to our shoulders. I firmly believe that a day-to-day life that we lead is a struggle, and we have tens if not hundreds of things to deal with. So we leave it to the professionals to deal with some of these data breaches, and they do a good job of it.
My data find that, from I'm a big comic book fan, and I love the character who plays Thor in all the Avengers. And sure enough, a couple of days later, everything that I was looking at was popping me up with images of Thor, and I was quite irritated with it. Because I didn't want other people to know that I had this little, soft spot in my mind for that individual. But that apart, in terms of, you talked about the Arab Spring, a country like Tunisia, and if you look at India today, there are many springs just waiting to, come up like that. So in such instances, I think being aware of security infringements or protection of your data becomes even more important. So what in your perspective would, let's say, you do to help influence a policy in terms of what can be done to safeguard people's privacy, people's data? Let's say, I'll give you an example. Today, when people post, when somebody with good intent posts something that appears to be inflammatory or contradictory to someone else's thoughts, there's almost an uprising that happens. And immediately that person is vulnerable. Okay? So the contradiction of being empowered and vulnerable at the city sort of normalized or dealt with in some way, shape or form. Because then that can typically take away the freedom of what the network actually provides.
Yeah, I think it's a very valid point. And now that we are in a connected world, where I've seen a lot of toddlers, actually, forget toddlers, the 1-year-old, who know how to navigate your mobile apps, right? It's also time for us to now learn how to keep ourselves secure, right? While there's one aspect that we build all the intelligence in the networks to be secure, there's a lot of aspect that we need to bring on ourselves to make sure that we are knowledgeable about what are the cookie settings that we have on our laptop. I mean, I know the reason Thor is showing up on all your browsers is because of the cookie settings, right? And we are not even aware of that. So I feel that, and I'm happy to see that at least in my kids' school, that is being taught to them, right? And I think, we guys have to now quickly learn and understand that. It's the same, right? Any kind of transformation, right? We had a digital transformation that changed the way people approached and looked at the world. I think in this connected world, we'll again have those cases where you'll see that someone is getting victimized. I think, I don't have answers for that, and I think, the social studies folks, they will have answers as to how to deal with that. But what I would recommend is every one of us should be very aware of how do we make everything secure, right? Right from the content of, what is there on your laptop, to going about and looking into the Wi-Fi router that you have at home, what are the settings? Because many of us don't even know that, there are firewall settings that we need to enable. What we've been doing, right, in the industry is we've been going and educating people a lot about, there are still data centers and there are still applications who have not built their networks to be secure, right? And for them to build the networks to be secure, they need to make sure that they have installed the right amount of devices that make the network secure. So we've been on a crusade of going about and making sure that we educate people about that. But about the social impacts, definitely, I think that is going to happen, and we have to brace ourselves and be better prepared as to how to deal in that world.
So you think this kind of hacking or vulnerabilities can be controlled if you do a better security testing?
It happens, and it's part of, even before you release a product or an upgrade to a product, especially in the security world, you will have to go through a very comprehensive test procedure, which is completely aligned with all the known security breaches that we know so far. If not, they don't send it out.
Yeah,
right?
and actually, it's not just about testing at the end when the product has been made. the whole aspect of security starts from the day we start looking at the requirements, right? We are building up a new product. Security is a number one requirement. As we are going about and implementing and writing the code, we have guidelines and we have strict criteria to make sure that there's no chance of anyone writing malicious code like what Kumar had taken an example of. So it's it has to be embedded right from the process of starting thinking about a product to the point of testing, as Kumar mentioned.
And there are different levels of security that people need. Some of the products that we build today are not just used for public consumption, it is also being used for defense networks and federal government networks. And so the level of security that is expected in those networks is military grade. And so, there are many practical examples of how you demilitarize a public living community. You kind of do the same thing in the network. So you kind of segregate the public network away from your private network and create a demilitarized zone. And in that zone, access is virtually not possible. So there are many different practical examples that you face in today's life where you really cannot go near a military camp. As a public, you're not allowed, it's restricted access. You cannot go near a military camp. And the same concepts are now being brought into these networks as we build that. So there are different real life examples that get applied to the digital world that we are creating around us.
Hi.
There was a news item sometime back that Facebook actually puts in a cookie in your browser, and what happens is it basically tracks what kind of Facebook accounts you're looking into, even though you're not a Facebook user. So in country like European Union, they have strict standards saying that these are the levels you're not supposed to do it, and I think Belgium or some other country has asked Facebook to remove the cookie. So what are the standards that are there in India to protect our data? And Juniper and other networking companies, what are they doing in synthesizing the government or any other body that would basically protect our data, that would bring in all the guidelines that are there in other countries? Do we have any such guidelines?
So the Indian government has its own Department of Information Technology and Security, and they formulate and they control the policies that govern the use of digital world within the country, right? And as a company like Juniper, we are often in consultation, we are called in by this ministry, and we have forums where we discuss about the security aspects. There are issues that are beyond us as a company that we really cannot handle some of these issues. But as a country, as a governing body, they can bring about policies for the safety and security of the citizens. And there are many different forums where we participate and we give our views of how the digital world should be used. The ultimate decision lies with the policymakers, not with an enterprise like Juniper, right? It does not. There is also a lot of responsibility that we as users carry on our shoulders, because at the end of the day, all these are commercial businesses, whether it is a Facebook or Google or WhatsApp. They are there to make money, and they will always find innovative ways of tracking an individual, their spending patterns, their buying patterns, their connect patterns, and all of that at the end of the day is valuable information for better e-commerce at some point of time. So they are all there to make money, right? We would like to think that we are living in an authentic world. We would like to think that we are living in a trusted world, but often that's not the case. On a lighter note, I would like to give an example and probably conclude. We will take your question as the last question. You've been trying to ask a question. Now tell me which is more authentic. I'm going to give you an example. The third popular website in the world, right, today is YouTube. That is the third most popular website in the world today, YouTube, right? After Google and Facebook, right? It's the third most popular website in the world. It was created, the idea came about, there were three founders, young folks, the partying kind, they like to lead their life, right? whether it is an up cycle in life or a down cycle in life, I want to enjoy and lead my life and party. That kind of people. So they had this idea and they created this video sharing website, right? It became very wildly successful, right? So a reporter goes to them after the success story, goes to founder one and says, you know, how did you get this idea? It's brilliant. And the first founder says, you know what, we were partying and we took some video shots and the three of us were unable to share the video amongst ourselves. And so we thought, you know, it's really useful to have a video sharing site. That was the response of founder one. Then you go to founder two. The same guy asks him the question, you know, how did you get upon this idea? It's brilliant. And the second guy says, you know, there was a tsunami in the Indian Ocean. Very tragic, very, very tragic. And I wanted to go get videos, live videos of the tsunami, right, that hit the Indian Ocean. And I was not able to find the videos. And so I thought, you know, a video sharing site would be fantastic. That was the response from the second founder. The third founder, when the reporter went to, said, you know, your two other co-partners gave this response. What do you say about it? He said, no, we were actually searching for Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction, and we couldn't find those videos. Right? So authenticity of what it is that triggered a brilliant idea that has kind of made it the third most popular website in the world. Right? We are not living in a truly authentic world. We are not living in a truly trusted world, right? There is suffering all around us. As we invent high technology and secure this high technology, it is of no use if it is not applied in the right manner, if it is not applied to empower people across the globe. When you have floods in Nepal, when you have floods in your own country, how is this technology helping us to really go help people that are in really helpless situation, right? How many people think in those lines? Not many. Not many. Truly not many, right? So because we are not really living in an authentic world and in a trusted world, we need to take adequate precautions, as how you would take adequate precautions when you step out of your home. And when you step out of your home, are you really you know, feeling really secure and you expect everything to be perfect? No. You take precautions. And similarly in the digital world, you take precautions with the full understanding that these are commercial businesses that are out there to make money, and the world is revolving around money. With that, we will take one question, and you've been trying to ask that question for a long time.
Is who owns routers? Is it the countries? Is it the governments of the countries, or the ISP providers, or the companies that manufacture routers? And second is, what goes behind deciding where to place the routers?
So it is typically the ISP providers. So whosoever is building up the network, whosoever owns the network, right? They are the ones that they go procure routers, switches, firewalls from people like us. What was your second question? How do you decide where to place the routers?
As a follow-up to your answer, like if you say it's an ISP provider, so if I want to connect from India to get some data, some part of the world where Airtel is not active,
Yeah.
how does that connection happen?
Yeah, so there are companies, for example, Tata
Communications.
TCL, Tata Communications Limited. They run these fat pipes, you know, these fat pipes that are running deep inside the oceans that are actually connecting continents. So while you might think that, oh, I'm just using Airtel, you know, Airtel has this tie-up with, say, a Tata Communications using their fat pipe. And then, you know, based on the IP address, it knows who to go route to and which ISP is hosting that network. Now, question about, you know, how do you decide where to place the router? I think, you know, there are different kind of routers, right? One is the kind of routers that are sitting in the edge, which are actually connecting you from your ISPs. Then there are core routers, right, which are sitting somewhere in the middle, which is just, the job of that is just to connect traffic, right? So most of the cases when you see a data center, right, all these routers are housed together. It's just that, you know, they have the intelligence of knowing how to go route this packet to the other router and so on. But typically what you will see is on the edge, the routers that are connecting you with your ISP, they will have a natural affinity to be closer to your location. The core routers could be anywhere. And again, you know, at the receiving end, at the destination, there will be some edge routers that will be closer to the ISP or the data center where the information is housed.
So just to elaborate on that, right, and also kind of talk about the transformation that is happening to us, right? In many of the cities, you would see public phone booths, right? We are used to that, public phone booths, right? The public phone booths are actually giving way to the next modern technology now. So there are going to be public accessible booths, but these public accessible booths are not going to be just plain breed telephone booths. They are going to be Wi-Fi spots. And the Wi-Fi spots have some of these devices, which we call as access routers, and they carry the traffic from there to a metro aggregation point, and you place a different kind of a router, and from there they get aggregated to a central location, which is a very high capacity router that aggregates all the city's traffic. And you're talking about maybe 10,000 phone booths being replaced by these next generation booths, and they call it like pylons, and Google is trying to do that on a pilot mode in partnership with us in New York City, right? So you would see the transformation happening, and then depending on the density and the criticality of the traffic, you decide what is the capability of the router that you need and what kind of router that you need to place it. That is point number one. Point number two is the so-called internet today that you know of is a mix and match of so many smaller networks coming together, built by so many people in the world coming together and forming one universal network. And while there is a public internet universal network, there are also many enterprises that create their own private network for their own use, for interconnecting their own branch offices or their own people that work from different locations, right? So a network can be private and public, but the internet as you know of today is some combination of so many networks coming together that have been built over the last 20-25 years. Okay?
We are now seeing the screen of death which says we are done.
I see. Okay, with that, our heartfelt thanks, for inviting us to the Grace Hopper Foundation and also to Anita Borg Institute, and it was fantastic being here and sharing our views on how the network is transforming this planet today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.